Hi, my name's Ainsley. 15 years. That's how long I gave to my family's business. Late nights, missed holidays, all of it. And then, one morning, my father sent me a text. You're out. Lawyer will call. No call, no warning, just silence. But silence has a sound when it echoes through everything you built. And when I found out they'd been rewriting the story, replacing my name, draining my accounts, making deals behind closed doors, I started documenting. Why did they think I'd never fight back? And what do you do when the people who raised you are the same ones quietly cutting you out? The coffee machine beeped twice before the pot filled. I hadn't even poured a cup yet. The morning light through my kitchen blinds painted pale gold lines on the floor, the only warmth in the room. I reached for my phone. Just muscle memory. I wasn't expecting anything. Then it buzzed. A text from my father. My thumb paused above the screen. I thought maybe he was confirming our weekly check-in meeting at the office, or maybe he needed help reviewing something on short notice. That wasn't unusual. I was the one who always picked up. But no. You're out. Lawyer will call. That's all it said. No hi. No, we need to talk. No signature. Just that. For a second, I honestly thought it was spam, or a wrong number. Then I read it again. And again. You're out. I had to sit down. My knees didn't ask me, they just gave in. I sat right on the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinet, the coffee still dripping behind me, ticking like a clock mocking me. 15 years. I'd been with the family business 15 years, longer than Callista, longer than any employee. I'd been there when the roof leaked, when the payroll bounced, when the only bonus I got was a cold slice of pizza and a "you're a lifesaver" from my mom. And now I got a text. I didn't respond. Not at first. I couldn't. My head was spinning, but my body was still, like the moment after a car crash where everything is silent and your ears are ringing and you don't even know where to look yet. I opened the Slack app. Error loading. Tried my email. Access denied. I was gone. Clean. Surgical. I called his phone. Straight to voicemail. I called my mother. No answer. I called Callista. She let it ring once, maybe twice, then dumped it to voicemail. They weren't just cutting me out. They had already done it. I stood up slowly and poured that cup of coffee like a robot. My hand shook when I brought it to my lips. I didn't drink. I just held it. Something about the warmth grounded me for a second. But it didn't last. I opened my laptop. One email had come through before they locked me out. From HR, if you could call it that. Our family never really had a proper HR department. Just a few templated messages managed by whatever assistant was willing. Subject: transition of responsibilities. No, dear Ainsley. No, thank you. Just bullet points and contact info for a corporate attorney I'd never heard of. It was like watching your name get scraped off a tombstone in real time. I sat in the living room after that. Didn't turn on the TV. Didn't cry either. Not yet. I just stared at nothing. That strange blankness when your brain's overloaded and refuses to let another thought in. I remember watching the dust float in the morning light, thinking, this is how people disappear, not in accidents, not in violence, but in boardrooms, in inboxes, with signatures. Around noon, I got up to change. Still no calls, no texts. The silence was heavier than the betrayal. I picked up my phone again, half hoping it was all a mix-up, that there was a follow-up text, some kind of explanation. There wasn't. Instead, a knock on the door. I hesitated, looked through the peephole. A courier in uniform, holding a padded envelope. I opened the door slowly. "Delivery for Ainsley Monroe," he said, not even glancing up. He handed me the package, tapped his screen, then walked off. The envelope was thick, heavy in a way that wasn't about weight. I already knew. Formal termination. Await counsel. I didn't open it. I walked back into the kitchen, laid the envelope on the counter, and stared at it like it might detonate. It didn't. It just sat there, quiet and final. The sun had shifted. The kitchen now felt cold. The light was harsh, casting sharp shadows across everything. I stood there a while, hands flat on the counter, the envelope between them like a dead thing. My phone buzzed again. Not a call, a calendar notification. It reminded me that tomorrow was our quarterly alignment meeting, the one I always prepared the decks for, the one where I presented revenue data and absorbed the blame when things dipped and shared credit when they rose. Not this quarter, not anymore. I turned off the reminder. Then I turned the phone face down. Still no calls, no texts, not even a "this is hard for us too." Just that one line. I sat down on the couch, legs tucked beneath me, wrapped in the same blanket I used when working late nights. I stared at the envelope again. 15 years. I whispered to the empty room. I gave you 15 years. You gave me one line. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. After whispering that line, those 10 words that somehow weighed more than all the reports I'd ever filed, I sat in the dark for hours. The envelope was still on the counter. I didn't touch it. I wouldn't give them that kind of power, not yet. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I pulled out my old laptop, the one I used to use when the office Wi-Fi was too slow for the database backups I ran manually every Friday night. Back then, everyone thought I was just being thorough. But I wasn't covering my bases. I was preparing to be forgotten. The screen flickered to life slowly, like it, too, wasn't ready for what I was about to find. I navigated to a folder labeled Initiatives 2020. Inside were subfolders, each one labeled with a client name, a date, and my initials. A few had audio recordings, internal strategy calls I'd kept for reference. Nothing secret, nothing illegal, just my own documentation. That was how I operated. Quiet, responsible, thorough. I clicked into one of the folders. Evercraft, Q3 Reposition Plan. I remembered that one. I spent 6 months researching market segmentation, building the presentation deck from scratch. I pitched it at a leadership roundtable. Got a few nods, a pat on the shoulder, a verbal, "we'll take it from here," from Callista. But now, staring at the document, I noticed something different. The new version, the one now featured on the company's official site, was altered. The font was the same, the structure almost identical, but the author metadata. It said Callista Monroe. I double-checked the creation date. Mine, March 11th, 2020. The company's version, April 3rd, 2020. I opened the two files side by side. My language was there, word for word in places. But gone were my initials. Gone was the timeline spreadsheet I had painstakingly tailored to a budget our team could actually manage, replaced by something flashier, more polished, less real. I sat back in my chair, mouth dry. They didn't just cut me out, they rewrote me out. The sting hit deeper than I expected. I closed the laptop, suddenly suffocating in the silence. I needed to breathe. I needed something familiar. By sunrise, I found myself driving. No music, no podcast, just tires on pavement. My hands gripped the wheel too tightly. The air smelled like pine and distant rain, Portland's usual morning perfume. I pulled up to my parents' house a little after 7 a.m. Mom was already outside, watering her garden, wearing that lavender robe she only ever wore on weekends. She looked up, startled, but didn't say anything as I parked and stepped out. I didn't wait for pleasantries. "I need to talk," I said. She nodded and gestured toward the patio chairs, the ones we used to sit in when she'd give me advice about high school drama or college applications, back when I thought she saw me. We sat. For a moment I couldn't speak. Then I asked, "Why wasn't I told? Why didn't you warn me?" She exhaled slowly, setting her watering can down. "I know this hurts, sweetheart." I stared at her. "Then why?" Her voice was calm, too calm. "Some roles. They require a certain presence, a sense of polish. You're smart, of course, but Callista's always had the public edge, the poise." I laughed once, dry, bitter. "I'm 36. I've kept the lights on through 4 fiscal crises. I handled the vendor strike. I restructured the West Coast logistics single-handedly." "I know," she said gently, sipping from her tea. "And that's why we trusted you with the internal work. But what the world sees, that matters now more than ever. Callista has that instinct." What she has, I snapped, is my work. Mom didn't flinch. Image matters, Ainsley. So does truth. The words hung between us. She didn't challenge them, just looked down into her cup like it held better answers than I ever could. When I stood, she didn't follow me to the car. The ride back home was longer than before. Not because of traffic, but because I finally understood. They weren't confused. They weren't panicking. They were intentional. And somehow, that hurt worse. Back at the apartment, I dug through my voicemail archives, old ones I had saved from moments I thought mattered. Mom's voice, light and full of affection, saying, "You're the glue, baby. Don't let them fall apart." I played that line 3 times before deleting it. I didn't need those words anymore. Not when they came from someone who'd actively helped peel me away. I spent the evening rereading my old journals. I'd kept them sporadically. Thoughts from board meetings, travel notes from client visits, scribbles from hotel lobbies. One entry from 2 years ago stood out. They said I'm too quiet in rooms full of noise. Maybe silence just makes them uncomfortable. I stared at that line, then added underneath, if I disappeared, would they notice? Not legally, not publicly, just emotionally. I closed the book, sat there for a while, listening, not to noise, but to the total absence of it. And then I opened the company website again, clicked on the Our Team tab. There they were. Callista in a navy blazer, her hand resting confidently on Dad's shoulder, both of them grinning like they'd just solved world peace. No trace of me, no photo, no title, no mention, not even my name. I sat still, eyes locked on the glowing staff photo that had just refreshed on the company website. The familiar shot, Callista in the center, her hand resting on our father's shoulder with practiced ease, like the weight of legacy belonged to her and only her. Her smile was flawless, wide and certain, the kind meant for headlines. Mine had never looked like that. I'd smiled in spreadsheets, in late-night budget meetings and quiet approvals, in the early days when saving a client from collapse at 2 a.m. meant more than any social media feature. I'd smiled behind scenes, in corners where the real work lived, not in press releases, not in photo ops. I closed the laptop with deliberate calm, as if slamming it shut might crack more than the screen. The silence in my apartment thickened. I walked into the kitchen, each step grounded, slow. The coffee pot was still half full from yesterday, cold, untouched. I emptied it without flinching, rinsing the glass carafe under a stream of water that hissed and steamed. It was mechanical, cleansing. I wasn't crying. I wasn't screaming. I didn't need to. Instead, I pulled open the bottom drawer beneath the microwave. Inside was the old hard drive, a familiar shape in my hand, dusty, forgotten, but still intact. I hadn't touched it in nearly a year. The cord was frayed at the edges, its rubber casing slightly peeled, but it connected with a click that sounded like muscle memory. My fingers moved without hesitation, familiar paths. I opened folders I hadn't visited in months. Some were backups, others labeled cryptically but accurately. Inside them, versions, raw files, dashboards, years of work, stored not out of paranoia, but necessity. I'd always been the one who remembered the details, the one asked to keep track of that, or document this just in case. I had done it, quietly, consistently, and now I was grateful I had. They thought they could erase me. Let's see how far back their scrub goes. I scrolled through timelines. Project milestones, performance reports, notes from key meetings, email trails forwarded to myself when things began feeling slippery. There it all was. Evercraft, Solaris, Jensen Pike, internal campaigns, strategy decks with tracked edits, every contribution, every signature, every version, all mine. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from clarity, a sharp electric current of comprehension. And then I saw it. A folder I didn't recognize. Meridian Contract, Q4 Holding. The naming convention was off, too vague for something internal. I clicked it open. And my stomach dropped. There it was, a signed agreement, dated, formal, between our company and Meridian Group Holdings, a known private equity firm. Two signatures adorned the document, Callista's and our father's. Mine was absent. The date? 2 weeks before that text. 2 weeks before they told me I was out, that the company was going in a new direction, that my seat at the table was no longer required. I blinked once, twice. Steady. 3 years ago, I'd rewritten and ratified our internal bylaws myself, reviewed line by line with legal. And I remembered that clause as clearly as I remembered the birthday our mother forgot. Any restructuring involving equity redistribution required unanimous approval from all family shareholders. That included me. They'd signed without me, illegally, and quietly. I sat back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap as my brain slowed the storm into precision. This wasn't betrayal in the emotional sense anymore. This was breach of contract. This was litigation. They had assumed I wouldn't notice, that I'd disappear into some sad corner, lick my wounds, and whisper about it over drinks with sympathetic friends. They didn't think I'd verify. They didn't think I'd fight. Wrong. I opened my banking app next. A quiet voice in the back of my head tugged at me, something I hadn't allowed myself to look at, but could no longer avoid. I clicked into the emergency fund. A decade ago, during a near catastrophe with a supplier, I had scraped every available dollar to cover payroll and stabilize the quarter. I sold my car, cashed out a small IRA, built the fund myself. It wasn't in my name, technically, but it was mine. Everyone knew that. Verena once called it Ainsley's lifeboat. Until now. Balance, $421.87. 6 months ago, it had read over $86,000. I clicked through the transaction history. A rebranding initiative, a PR contract with a firm I hadn't approved. Travel expenses for Callista's press tour, New York, LA, 2 dinners at restaurants I couldn't pronounce. All siphoned, strategically, quietly. They hadn't just erased me. They'd used my money to buy Callista a spotlight. I didn't move for a long moment. Then, I exhaled, slow, final. There was no confusion left. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was orchestration, designed, executed, timed. And now I was documenting. I opened a fresh folder on the desktop. Litigation ready, master. I began sorting everything. Timestamps, file versions, Slack logs, emails, bank records, vendor invoices, screen recordings, shared drive metadata, confirmations, receipts. For every document they altered, I had the original. For every meeting they removed me from, I had the invitation, the summary, the proof. They wanted to revise the history, but I had the footnotes, the citations, the edits and track changes. Hours passed. I didn't eat. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The sunlight shifted across the floor, then faded. The only sound in the room was the soft clicking of keys and the occasional scrape of my chair across the hardwood. By 6:45 p.m., I finally stood. My body ached. My mind didn't. I knew what came next. I picked up my phone and called Maribel. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was cautious. Ainsley? I didn't waste time. I didn't need to. Do you still have access to the 2018 vendor compliance backup? There was a pause. I do, she said slowly. Are we doing this? I stared at the files open on my screen. The documentation spread like an autopsy report. We're not fighting, I said quietly, steadily. We're documenting. After Maribel's voice faded on the call, I sat motionless for a few more minutes. The desk light buzzed faintly beside me, casting a soft cone of amber across the pile of printed documents I'd gathered over the past few hours. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't type anything. I didn't need to, not yet. Instead, I opened my email. There it was. Subject: you should see this. No sender name, just an address that looked like someone had mashed the keyboard. The message contained a single line of text and 2 attachments. The line read, "They're rewriting you." I hesitated for a beat, then clicked. The first file was a screenshot. It was an internal email thread from the communications team, forwarded between marketing leads and PR consultants. The instructions were clear. Scrub all references to my name from any legacy material still live on the website, promotional decks, and public-facing archives. The second attachment was a list of talking points labeled Brand Evolution, Monroe Family Legacy. And just like that, I knew. This wasn't about cutting me out of the company. This was about erasing me. My chest tightened, not with grief, not even with shock, with clarity. It was like hearing someone confess to a crime you already knew they committed. There was no drama left, just the cold logistics of moving forward. I stood up, took the files from the printer, and laid them out across my kitchen table. Next to them, I placed the original versions, the drafts I had written, the data I had compiled, the designs I had signed off on, my handwriting, my annotations, my name, faded from all the places it had once belonged. They'd underestimated me. Again. I poured myself a glass of water, set it down untouched, and walked into the other room. The TV flickered softly, muted. I turned up the volume, local news, business feature segment. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. The chyron read, Callista Monroe, the visionary behind the family resurgence. The anchor smiled, gesturing toward a clip of Callista standing on a stage at some industry event, talking about reviving legacy through innovation. She looked like she'd always belonged there. Hair polished, teeth shining, speaking as if every bullet point had emerged from her soul instead of my spreadsheets. I muted the TV again. Not even 5 minutes passed before I received a text from an old colleague. Did you see the article? This isn't right. She attached a link. The headline hit like a slap. The face of the family legacy. There was Callista, center of a full-page spread in Portland Monthly's business issue. It was an in-depth profile, singing praises about how she'd steered the company out of financial hardship, how she was revolutionizing brand perception. One paragraph in particular made my vision blur. While others maintained the numbers, it was Callista Monroe who brought heart, vision, and modern sensibility back into the fold. Others. That's what I was now. Others. I didn't rage, didn't pace the room. I sat down, opened a fresh browser tab, and searched the article author's name. I copied their email. Wrote one line. Would you like to see who actually wrote the 2019 strategic turnaround plan? I hit send. Then I pulled out the photo box from under my bed, one I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a copy of my original pitch, the same one I'd presented in the dining room 3 years ago when we held a family review session. I could still see Dad leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, asking, "What's the long-term margin impact?" Callista had spent most of the meeting flipping through her phone. Mom had nodded politely at my proposal, said, "It's a bit ambitious, but keep polishing it." And I had. For 2 more years. Quietly, thoroughly, until Callista resurfaced, rebranded it, and walked it into the spotlight like she'd birthed it herself. I placed that pitch on the table beside the others. Then I printed the article, printed the email chain, printed everything. By the time I was done, the table was full. Evidence, fragments, facts. No longer just files. They were proof. "They think I'm the ghost," I murmured, sliding my fingers along the edge of a page. "Let's see how they handle when ghosts document everything." I took a deep breath and picked up my phone again. This time I called a different name from my contacts. Rita Jacobs, forensic financial analyst. Discreet. Thorough. Quietly feared by companies who'd tried to fudge numbers. She answered after 2 rings. "Ainsley?" "It's time," I said. Rita didn't ask what I meant. "You want a full audit?" "No," I said. "Not yet. I want documentation, patterns. I want clarity, on paper." A pause. Then, "I'll need 6 days." "You have 3, I said. "I'll send you access tonight." When I hung up, the sky outside had gone full twilight. I flicked on the kitchen light. It hummed overhead. There was no satisfaction in what I was doing. Not yet. Just the steady grip of momentum. Later that night, after I'd triple-checked the folders I shared with Rita and backed everything up on 2 external drives, I sat back and stretched. My neck ached. My wrists burned. Still, I smiled. I hadn't disappeared. They'd tried to write me out. But I had the receipts. Just as I powered down the laptop, a new email landed in my inbox. Different address this time. Another random string of letters. Subject line, check tomorrow's press again. They're going national. By the time the sky lightened into soft blue, I hadn't slept. I'd moved from my dining table to my small rented desk at a co-working space on Hawthorne. It was early, too early for most of the regulars, but I wanted the silence. I needed it. The email from the night before still hung in my thoughts. They're going national, and they did. A full feature in the national edition of Inkman magazine dropped before sunrise. The title scrolled across my screen in bold white letters against a polished photo of Callista. How the Callista brand revived a legacy company. Legacy. As if I had never existed. I didn't read the entire article. I skimmed. Enough to recognize the recycled phrases from our marketing decks, ideas born from whiteboard sessions I had led, budget models I had built, strategy paths I had fought to keep lean and local. She wore them now like a crown. Tailored blazer, teeth-perfect smile, speaking of vision and resilience as if she had bled for this business. I closed the tab and opened my task list. This wasn't about emotion anymore. Rita, the forensic accountant, had messaged me at 6:10 a.m. on the dot. "Ready when you are," her text said. I shared the internal system access credentials, the backups, the quarterly tax entries I'd archived on external drives just in case. A few hours later, she called. "Ainsley," she said, tone neutral but focused. "It's not just bad bookkeeping. There are 2 sets of ledgers." My body tensed. "You're sure?" "There's the version filed internally, the one you've seen. Then there's a sanitized set being prepped for investor review. Cleaned up, condensed, losses hidden. And these were pushed by Callista? I can't say with absolute certainty yet, but the edits trace back to her team's IP blocks. Dorian's approval stamp is all over them." I gripped the edge of the desk. "Can you send me screenshots?" "Already in your inbox?" she replied. "Let me know how you want to proceed." I thanked her, hung up, and exhaled slowly. They were laundering their story, not just with words, but with numbers. I opened the folder labeled Accounts, Comparative Drafts, added a new subfolder, Double Ledger Evidence, and began saving every file Rita sent over. Once the files were secure, I sat back in my chair and took a breath. There wasn't time for grief. This wasn't a betrayal anymore. It was a blueprint of deception. They were laying the foundation for a narrative that cut me out of the history I helped build. And if I didn't move carefully, they'd succeed. I opened Slack. Not the company's Slack. I hadn't had access to that in days. But my own personal archive of screenshots and notes, messages from finance staff, archived chats where I clarified vendor invoice gaps, adjusted projections, corrected bad math someone else had tried to float past me. Then I moved on to emails, not ones I had received, but ones I had sent. Internal reminders, process notes, just circling back messages I'd written to cover Callista's delays or Dad's missing approvals. I spent the next few hours sorting everything. It was tedious, yes, but it was methodical, therapeutic. Proof that I hadn't imagined my contribution, that I wasn't just the numbers girl, that I wasn't invisible. Around noon, I composed a short email to Callista. Nothing dramatic, no accusations. Subject, documentation alignment. Hi, Callista. Noticed a few legacy project assets have been updated without original contributor attribution. Let me know if you'd prefer I loop in legal directly to help align public materials. Best, Ainsley. I hit send. Then I waited. 24 hours passed. Nothing. Then finally, 25 hours and 13 minutes later, I got her reply. Let's discuss this offline. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just that cool, dismissive tone I'd come to expect. As if I were asking a favor instead of asserting a right. Fine. If she wanted to discuss offline, she'd get her wish. Just not the way she thought. 2 days later, I got a text from a former colleague in operations. Thought you should see this. Don't tell anyone it came from me. Attached was a PDF, an internal company memo from the board. It read, effective immediately, all external document access must be approved by either Callista Monroe or Dorian Monroe. Any prior shared links or documents will be reviewed and restricted accordingly. My heart rate stayed steady. They knew. They were circling the wagons. And when people start locking doors, it usually means they're hiding something inside. I didn't panic. I updated my records, printed the memo, and placed it neatly into my litigation binder. Then, for the first time in weeks, I renamed the top folder on my desktop. From Timeline Evidence Internal to Legacy Reclaimed, Final Draft Pending. I didn't need coffee the next morning. The adrenaline had already set in before sunrise. The email from my anonymous source played over and over in my mind. They're panicking. They're about to smear you publicly. I arrived early at the co-working space again. Too early, the sun barely lifting above the rooftops. I slid into my usual corner desk and opened my laptop with a sense of quiet precision. It wasn't anger I felt anymore. It was something cleaner, more dangerous. Purpose. The news broke during a morning talk show. One of those cheerful segments filled with big smiles, bright lighting, and warm banter. And there she was. Callista, perfect posture, blonde hair styled just enough to say effortless, that confident smirk she'd perfected in every school photo since 8th grade. She spoke about the company as if she'd carried it alone through the storm, about transformational shifts and a renewed sense of ownership. Not a single mention of me, not one acknowledgement. The host leaned in and asked, "What's been your proudest moment during the company's transition?" Callista didn't blink. Shifting the company culture away from dependency and toward accountability. I laughed aloud in the empty room. Dependency? I'd carried that company through every quiet storm, kept things alive while they smiled for cameras. I turned off the video. Before I could even process it fully, my phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Daniel had been one of the junior finance assistants I mentored during his internship 3 years ago. Green as they came, but honest. Solid. The message read, "They're making me sign a retroactive project attribution memo. Lists Callista as the project originator on everything. I didn't want to, but they threatened my renewal." There was a file attached. It was a redlined version of a document I'd written, the same budget restructure plan I had stayed up 2 nights finalizing before the 2019 Q4 meeting. My initials had been replaced. Lead, CM. Now stared back at me. I took a slow breath, then another. I typed back, "Thank you for sending this. Sit tight. You don't need to do anything more." And then I opened a new email. This one addressed to my legal team. I attached Daniel's file, then all the double ledger files from Rita. Copies of original project drafts, metadata screenshots, dated Slack messages, every last piece of verifiable truth. Subject, Discovery. Preservation Notice, Monroe Holdings. In the body, I wrote, "Per our previous discussion, please issue a legal discovery preservation notice to Monroe Holdings effective today. I've included all relevant documentation and evidence to support pending claims. I am not seeking mediation. Let them feel the weight before we speak." I hit send. The next 24 hours unfolded like the slow pulling of a fire alarm. At first, it was just background chatter. Then came the rumble. My contact inside the company forwarded a memo Dorian had blasted to all department heads. All internal staff are reminded not to engage in speculation or discussion regarding leadership transitions, financial restructuring, or external legal inquiries. Please refer all media inquiries to Callista Monroe or legal counsel. And just like that, they confirmed everything without saying a word. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't post cryptic messages or vague quotes. Instead, I logged in quietly and watched as Callista began locking down dashboards, revoking file access, redirecting Slack channels to private threads. But she was too late. I already had everything I needed. That evening, I sat at my desk as dusk crept through the window. The neighborhood grew quiet. A few kids played outside, their voices distant and airy. I turned back to my computer, my fingers hovering over the keys. I drafted one last message, to Dorian. Subject, Clarification for upcoming investor meeting. Hi, Dad. Just confirming that I will be joining next week's investor session via legal counsel. I look forward to clarifying a few historical contributions and records on the call. Let me know if you'd prefer I forward supporting documentation in advance. Best, Ainsley. I reread it twice before hitting send. No flourish, no dramatics, just the facts, clean and sharp. The email didn't bounce. It didn't sit unread. In less than 10 minutes, it was forwarded 3 times, internally. I smiled. That was always the part they never understood about me. I didn't need to yell. I just needed them to read. That night, as I was wrapping up the day's files and organizing physical copies into labeled folders, a new message arrived, another anonymous source. This one was shorter, colder. They're panicking. They're about to smear you publicly. I closed the laptop slowly, walked to the window, looked out at the city lights flickering on one by one. Let them try. They lit the fire. I brought the documents. I didn't sleep that night either. I kept refreshing my inbox like a nervous tick, even though I already knew what was coming. The warning had been clear. They were panicking. And when people like Callista panic, they don't retreat, they retaliate. The first article dropped just after 6 a.m. Pacific time. It wasn't on any of the major outlets. That's not how these things begin. No, this one appeared on a semi-notorious blog, the kind that brands itself as insider business gossip, where anonymous sources always seem to magically appear when someone's reputation needs soft destruction. The headline was bait. Monroe drama. Former executives' erratic behavior may have sparked internal collapse. I clicked it. Of course I did. The piece was riddled with the usual nonsense. Claims I was emotionally unstable, that I had a history of overstepping boundaries, that I struggled to collaborate with others, that I had once refused to leave a boardroom even after being asked. No names were attached to the quotes, just a senior leadership source, and internal company staff familiar with the matter. Disruptive, possessive, uncooperative. I recognized the language instantly. It was the same tone that had followed every competent, quiet woman I'd ever admired out the door. They were trying to smear me with the oldest weapon in the book, painting me unreasonable so they wouldn't have to explain why I was removed. I didn't react. Instead, I screenshotted the article, archived it, added it to the smear attempt folder I had already created 2 days ago, half out of paranoia, half out of preparation. I poured coffee, sat in my chair, and waited. The storm didn't take long. Just before 8 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from a contact at a regional newsroom. Check Twitter. I did. A video had leaked, not mine, theirs. The clip was short, 38 seconds. Poor audio, poor angle, likely recorded from someone's phone left running in a jacket pocket. But the voices were unmistakable. Callista's first. She's too quiet to fight back. That's her problem. She'll stew in it, but she won't move. Then Verena, my mother. She's not built for this, Callista. Never was. She clings. That's all she knows. Then Dorian. Just fire her. We'll clean up later. No drama. That was it. 38 seconds. It didn't need to be more. It spread like wildfire. Justice. For Ainsley began trending before noon. News anchors who had read the smear piece with smug detachment scrambled to issue corrections. Industry podcasters recorded emergency episodes dissecting the leak. Business leaders who'd once nodded along to Callista's jargon-laced speeches now retweeted the clip with quiet disgust. I didn't comment. I didn't have to. The world was doing it for me. Reporters called. A lot of them. Some wanted quotes. Some wanted on-camera interviews. A few wanted me to join panel discussions about gender dynamics in family-run companies. I declined every invitation. Instead, I opened Twitter once, typed one sentence, and posted, "When someone shows you who they are, press record." Then I logged off. That afternoon, the company issued a statement, polished, predictable. Monroe Holdings does not condone internal leaks or unauthorized recordings. We remain committed to transparency and integrity. The bank was less forgiving. At 4:12 p.m., I got a call from an insider at the financial institution that managed our primary accounts. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. Accounts temporarily frozen. Routine audit, of course. she said dryly. But timing, it's everything. By evening, Dorian sent an internal memo to all remaining employees. All company communications, internal and external, must go through legal moving forward. Any staff found violating this policy will face immediate termination. I read it, printed it, filed it. Then I closed my laptop and lit a candle, something I hadn't done in months. The scent reminded me of a time when the house I lived in felt like a home, not a war room. I sat there as the flame flickered, quiet, listening to the hum of my fridge and the distant sound of a car passing by outside. Everything had changed, but somehow I hadn't. I was still the same woman who stayed late to triple-check vendor invoices. Still the same person who had warned Dad 5 years ago that switching fulfillment software without a full pilot run was a mistake. Still the one who took notes in every meeting, even when no one else did. They thought I was weak because I didn't shout. They forgot I was the one who kept the books balanced. It was nearly midnight when I checked my email one last time. A new message had arrived. Subject: Board vote scheduled. You are invited. No greeting, just a date, a time, a Zoom link, and one line at the bottom. We expect your attendance. I stared at the screen for a moment, then closed the laptop slowly. They were calling a vote. Finally. The message had no salutation, no warmth, just a calendar link, a time, and a subject line. Board vote scheduled. You are invited. It felt more like a challenge than an invitation. And maybe, deep down, that's exactly what they intended. One last attempt to measure control, to watch whether I'd show up needing something from them. But I didn't. Instead, I forwarded it to my attorney with a brief note. I won't attend, but I'll send my part. She replied within minutes. Understood, it'll be delivered on time. That afternoon, I packed a thin black envelope and placed it carefully into a FedEx pouch. Inside were 5 things: a flash drive, a short printed statement, a notarized resignation of my ownership rights, a copy of the audit summary, and a scanned letter from my mother, written 5 years ago, tucked into a birthday card I had never thrown away. The board meeting was virtual, of course. I wasn't on the Zoom call. I wasn't in the room, but I was there. At exactly 2:00 p.m., a new file appeared in the shared board folder. It had no title beyond, "For archive." There was no introductory email, no greeting or signature, just a silent upload, like the quiet drop of a stone into still water, where only those paying attention will see the ripple. Inside the file, they found every piece of what they thought had been buried: PDFs of the financial discrepancies, screen captures of Slack conversations dated, time-stamped, clean, the leaked audio clip, unedited, raw, in its entirety. My project plans from the last 4 years, each marked with version history metadata, author ID, and time of initial creation. And at the end, a letter. You built a legacy on my silence. This silence is no longer yours to keep. That was all I gave them, and it was enough. Within an hour, my phone started lighting up. Not from the company, of course, but from reporters, lawyers, old colleagues who hadn't known which side of the line to stand on. Some called just to say, "I'm sorry." Others asked what they could do. A few wanted to leak more. I didn't respond. That wasn't my fight anymore. By evening, Callista held a press conference. She stood behind a branded podium in a room full of cameras, wearing a crisp gray suit, her voice composed, her words hollow. As many of you have seen, certain documents were released without context. She smiled. That practiced, polished smile I knew too well. But the reporters didn't want spin. They wanted answers. Why did the board remove Ainsley Monroe? Can you confirm the audio clip features your voice? Who authorized the reallocation of the emergency fund? Callista stumbled, not in words but in poise. I could see it, even through the screen. Her left hand twitching at the podium, the slight, involuntary blink that always came when someone backed her into a corner. Dorian didn't appear. The next day, the company issued a brief statement. Effective immediately, Dorian Monroe will step down from all active leadership roles, citing health considerations. We wish him well. Verena said nothing. She vanished from public view like fog. As for me, I stayed home. I baked banana bread. I rearranged my bookshelves. I canceled the landline I hadn't used in 6 years. And in the quiet, I found peace. A few days later, I printed my final documents, my formal exit letter, a signed resignation from all board obligations and corporate shares. I didn't want a payout. I didn't want leverage. I wanted out. With it, I included a copy of my mother's letter, not the one Callista quoted in magazine interviews, but the one written by hand, in ink that had faded slightly over the years. If this family ever forgets what matters, I hope you remember. You're the glue, Ainsley. You always were. I placed that letter in a small frame and set it by my bed. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the loss. But it reminded me of something deeper, something no board vote could revoke. I had mattered, even if they chose to forget. That Friday, I stopped by Maribel's bookstore. It was early, quiet, the smell of new paper mixing with brewed espresso. She looked up from behind the register, smiled warmly. "You look different," she said. "Lighter, maybe," I replied. I wandered between the shelves for nearly an hour, not buying anything, not needing to, just breathing. No one asked about Callista, no one asked about Dorian, no one asked about Verena, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like a walking headline. I felt like a person again. As I stepped outside into the afternoon air, the sky opened just a little, a soft beam of sun cutting through the gray. I closed my eyes for a second, let it hit my face. Then my phone buzzed. A notification. I glanced at the screen. 82 missed calls. I stared at it. Not surprised, not angry, just done. Then I powered off the phone and slipped it into my coat pocket. I didn't need noise anymore. Silence had finally become mine. The moment my thumb pressed the button and the screen went dark, it felt final in a way nothing else had. No buzz, no vibration, no final ding or notification bubble. Just stillness. It was the kind of stillness that came after weeks of holding my breath without realizing it. A hush that didn't demand explanation or apology. A silence I didn't have to defend. I placed the phone face down on the corner of the kitchen table, next to my empty coffee mug, the one I'd held more for comfort than caffeine, and stepped out onto the narrow balcony of my apartment. The early Portland sky stretched out in front of me, painted in grays that blurred into blue. The clouds hung low, like they were trying to listen. It was the kind of morning that offered comfort without asking questions. I welcomed that kind of company now. 2 weeks had passed since the file drop. 2 weeks since I stopped flinching at every new ping, since I walked away from the constant cycle of reaction and leaned into the calm that came afterward. I hadn't heard from Callista, or Dorian, or Verena. I hadn't expected to. But silence doesn't mean the world stops talking. People always find something to say, online, over brunch, behind doors they forget are thin. But I'd stepped back from all of it. Not out of fear, not to hide. Because for the first time, the silence wasn't loneliness. It was mine, earned, reclaimed, fully occupied. Back inside, I brewed another cup of coffee, stronger this time, something bold and dark enough to match the weather. I carried it to the small dining table by the window, where a stack of books sat half-sorted, and tucked inside the top one, peeking out from between the pages, was a photograph. It was me at 16, standing beside my mother. She was laughing, head tilted back slightly, eyes crinkling at the edges. Her arm was slung over my shoulder. I looked hesitant, awkward, caught somewhere between pulling away and leaning in. I kept that photo there, tucked into the book's spine like a placeholder for something I wasn't sure I'd ever return to. Next to the photo was the letter. The one I'd left folded in the back of a drawer for too long. The one I reread for the first time when everything started unraveling, when Callista's curated narrative began to collapse under the weight of what I'd finally stopped hiding. Mom's handwriting was slow, careful, every loop of ink deliberate. If anything ever divides this family, remember, what you built with your hands and your heart will always be yours, even if they pretend it wasn't. I read that line over and over, tracing it with my finger, like it could tether me to something true. Some days, it felt like comfort. Other days, a quiet apology she never got the chance to say out loud. But today, it felt like peace. And just like that, the tears came, not hot, not angry, just steady, quiet. I wasn't crying because I was broken, not because I was angry. I was crying because, for the first time in a long time, I could stop pretending I wasn't. After a while, I stood and moved through the apartment slowly. I folded the throw blanket on the couch, straightened a stack of mail on the counter, lit a candle. I wasn't rushing to outrun a to-do list. I wasn't answering to anyone. There were no meetings, no emails, no fire I had to extinguish alone. My phone still sat on the counter, face down. Its silence wasn't taunting me. It was a relief. Later that afternoon, I checked my voicemail for the first time in days. 82 missed calls. I listened to none of them. A week earlier, Callista had sent an email, clean and clipped. Would you be open to a conversation? Dorian didn't email himself. Of course not. He sent a message through his assistant, sterile and transactional. He's open to a quiet resolution. And Verena? She mailed a card. We're still family, no matter what's been said. But not one of them said, we were wrong. We're sorry. And I didn't need them to. I deleted the voicemails, archived the emails, folded the card once and slipped it into the back of a filing drawer beside the last shareholder update I'd ever receive. That chapter was over. Not burned, not torn apart, just shelved. I spent the next few days thinking about what my life might look like now that I didn't have to orbit around them, around their voices, their expectations, their silences. And maybe surprisingly, the answer wasn't vengeance. It wasn't justice through headlines or front-row vindication. It was contribution. Maribel's voice echoed in my memory from our last conversation. You ever think about teaching what you know? That's what brought me back to her bookstore that Wednesday morning. The rain tapped gently against the windows, soft like an afterthought. Maribel stood near the poetry shelves, restocking new arrivals. She looked up and smiled. You showed up. I did. We talked for over an hour, about all of it, about what I'd learned the hard way, about how no one teaches women, especially young ones, how to spot erasure before it becomes institutional, how to read contracts before trusting charm, how to claim space without apology. And then we planned something, a monthly workshop, no flashy promotion, no influencer tie-in, just real conversations, passed hand to hand, face to face, quiet empowerment, rooted in lived experience. That night, I framed my mother's letter. One line, under glass. You're the glue. I set it on my nightstand, next to a new notebook I hadn't yet opened. The room was softly dimmed, the breeze curling in through a cracked window. And I realized then, it wasn't about holding the family together anymore. It was about learning how to hold myself together. The next morning, I didn't check my phone. I put on a jacket and stepped outside, walked down Alberta Street, past the murals, past the same cafe where I'd once written sales reports while pretending I had time to breathe. I bought a muffin from the woman who used to pack my lunch order back when I lived in meetings. She didn't ask about Callista. She didn't mention the headlines. She just asked, "How's your morning?" And it was good. I walked toward the park, the air crisp, the trees turning gold at the edges. The clouds had begun to part, just slightly, as if even the sky was exhaling. I stood beneath one of the trees for a while, closed my eyes, let it settle. Then I whispered, not to anyone else, but for myself. This silence finally belongs to me. Sometimes, silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Ainsley didn't fight with noise, she fought with truth. This story reminds us that family isn't just about blood, it's about respect, accountability, and the courage to walk away when love turns into manipulation. What would you do if your own family erased your name? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories that hit where it hurts and heal where it matters.